Hi, I'm Rachel Lee. I'm a Korean American and I'm a licensed psychotherapist.
And I'm Brooke, I'm her daughter. So, today we're going to talk a little bit about the stigma around mental health and especially in the Asian American community. And I thought it'd be really interesting to hear what your thoughts are on for that coming from an industry of uh, mental health.
I realized when I was 13 years old this was the field that I wanted to enter in. And partly because I grew up in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and there were not very many Asians there. So I was at a library and was looking at some career pamphlets and noticed this pamphlet specifically was talking about counseling. And so I read up on it and noticed that there wasn't anyone in this field that was Asian. And that's what I've pursued since I was 13. So since then, the landscape has changed quite a bit. There are more psychotherapists in licensed psychotherapists in the counseling field that are Asian American.
Why do you think you were drawn to this profession at 13 years old, which is so young? Why do you think made you feel so clear about wanting to go down this path?
I think I was always a feeler. There was a lot of things and questions that I had. Partly it was because I grew up in an area that was very monoculture. I guess that's the best way to put it. And I was felt like the only Asian around. And being a feeler, I had a lot of questions about so many things that I wanted to bounce my ideas off and my questions about my internal state, about family of origin situations, but didn't have anyone that I could talk to. And so because of that, I think because of who I am, I was drawn to that field.
And so felt like you didn't have anyone around really to talk to growing up, not only because you felt isolated culturally growing up as a minority in the South, but within your family too. Grandma and grandpa, I know, were you guys immigrated from Korea,
Right.
and so they were working really hard, and that's part of the reason I know you were alone a lot of the time. But how do you think that affected you growing up?
Well, it was a situation where I knew my parents loved me. I knew that they worked very hard. And having that knowledge and being a sensitive kid, I didn't feel that I could burden them. I didn't feel, first of all, there wasn't a platform in which that I could go freely to talk to them. But not just that, I realized how tired they were. And so for me to approach them with any situations that I was going through, I didn't feel that I could do that. So that was a limitation in my family life.
Do you think that the immigrant mentality or the immigrant outlook on life is very different from the millennial generation and how we're being raised to being more encouraged on through media, through all these different platforms to talk more about how we feel, how we see the world? What are your thoughts on the contrast between that and more of the immigrant mentality?
Well, I can only talk about my own situation as an immigrant. And I do know that there is a difference between thriving and surviving. And for an immigrant family and even for myself, I felt there was a lot of surviving, just surviving to make ends meet, surviving the language barrier, surviving all the different challenges that an immigrant faces. And the millennials, fortunately, when I look at you and your sister, I would say because of that survival mentality that I was able to take a big step forward, your father and I, and we came to the place where we didn't want our children just to survive, but to thrive. And in order to do that, we wanted you to have the freedom to come to us, to talk with us, and to be able to share anything that you were struggling with. And that's the approach. So in my own situation and in our own family situation, that's the main difference that I see from an immigrant standpoint to the next generation.
Why do you think that sharing your feelings, expressing your emotions and your struggles, why do you think there is such a stigma around that in the Asian American community, in society in general, but particularly when it comes to being Asian? Why is there such a struggle in being able to share, or such a stigma around that?
I think from the perspective of Asian American, there is a lot of shame that comes with problems or expressing these problems, and it evidences weakness. And when you do have a weakness, you don't want to be upfront about it, and you cover it with this feeling of shame. And when you're under that realm of shame, you're not easily able to talk about those things, and it's basically you're trapped with that shame or that embarrassment of it. And so for the face value of most Asians, I've noticed that they don't want to reveal what is considered a weakness. Right.
Was there ever a point that you realized that the shame you felt trapped by wasn't a necessary burden?
Well, I think with education, at college, that's where I first initiated this, I believe, beginning of my self-understanding. And by self-understanding, understanding my implicit memories, being able to express myself and identify more about what my upbringing was like, to make those dot-to-dot connections in my life so that I lived life less reactionary. And it was really through my own experience in college when I was launched from my family of origin that I was able to understand how important it was to begin talking and expressing myself. And in college was when I first started this journey of not just my own journey of expressing my feelings and sharing my problems, but also being an advocate for other Asian Americans to express themselves as well.
And what does advocating for that look like to you?
Advocating looks different for people to people. For me, I'm very open about what I do. And you don't have to be a therapist to be able to be an advocate. You can actually be the recipient of it too. So I actually endorse and subscribe to, therapy. I'm not just one to provide it, but I also seek therapy as well. So it can come in different forms, but I would speak at local churches. I would initiate, my services in parent education at churches. And any chance I got, I would be able to be open about what I did, how I did it, and why I did it.
And what does mental health mean to you?
Mental health is, to me, the example that I always gave to you growing up was that if you had a broken leg, what would you do? Do you remember what I would say? If you had a broken leg, where would you go?
Doctor.
You would go to the doctor. And why would you go to the doctor?
Because your leg is broken.
But you could just pretend it wasn't broken.
It wouldn't heal properly.
Yeah. And so that's what I say mental health is that if you feel like there are some red flags like relational challenges, interpersonal conflicts, that if you feel that at school there are more conflicts than I guess other people are experiencing, that if you are having, problems sleeping because there are thoughts, if you're having thoughts that overwhelm you, if you are having family issues, all those things surface as not mental health problems, but it surfaces as symptoms that you just want to make sure that you're seeking the help just like you would a broken leg.
So you're saying to look for the signs in your life and seek help for that.
Yes.
Okay.
I feel that the word mental health has such a stigma to it that it's associated once again with a problem,
Mental
with
health,
an issue.
mental illness.
But it's just like physical health, physical well-being, mental well-being. I associate those words interchangeably, that it's not with stigma, but it's also something that we want to focus on so that we engender a positive outlook of what mental health is, just like we would with physical well-being or physical health.
And I think there is such a celebration of physical exercise on social media, whether it's sharing your passion for yoga or cycling and all these different types of classes or sports or activities that people do. Yet it doesn't seem that we are able to, as a society, celebrate mental health in such an open way or as equally of a positive way.
Sure.
And what do you think, I don't know what to say now. What do you think could change that?
What could change our outlook of mental health?
No,
Is that what you're talking about?
or I don't know anymore. Like, I don't know where I'm going anymore.
Why don't you ask me what therapy looks like?
Oh,
for
okay,
me?
yeah.
Okay.
Or feel like we can talk more about you. We'll go back. Okay.
Okay.
So, what is therapy for you as a therapist? What does that look like?
Well, most people come, most of my referrals come because of relational issues, interpersonal conflicts. So whether it's marriage or family or outside partnership or friendship, that's mostly why they come, to find some relief of relational challenges. And so therapy looks very different from person to person. But it doesn't have to be because there's a major crisis or a mental health breakdown. It comes in because they want to get to know themselves better. A lot of my clients come and say they do not want to look past in their life. I just want to look for the future. And in the field of psychoanalysis, where we're still continuing to grow from Freudian, therapy, the growth of it is to understand our past a bit and again make those connections so that we are allowed to see the implicit memories come to life for us, so that we again live life less reactionary. So if we are aware of our triggers, we're able to better identify what's happening within ourselves so that we don't react to the circumstances of life. So why does it evidence in relationships? It's because certain things are said. We're communicative people, and certain things are said, certain actions are shown and behaviors, and that triggers us, and we react in a way that we don't understand why. And most of those reactions are sometimes not positive, so then there is a conflict. So therapy looks different from person to person. It looks different in times of length and the experiences and the focus.
Do you think you necessarily need to have a problem to come into therapy?
Well, again, you're speaking to someone who subscribes and endorses therapy, and it's one of those things that, just like elementary school, high school and on is recommended, I highly recommend that everyone get to know themselves so that they become aware of themselves more, so that they can live life with more freedom.
Okay. With anxiety, depression, hyperattention deficit disorders, eating disorders, body image, physical confidence issues, do you think that these things are seen as weaknesses? And if so, how can we reimagine these things differently as a society?
Well, I think it becomes a disorder when we ignore them. It's when we make an understandable, recognition of what those symptoms are, to be able to treat them. But left unnoticed or ignored, I think that's when it becomes a disorder. And so as soon as you have that problem, this is the word I use, the phrase I always say, if you can't define it, you can't diffuse it, right? If you can't define what that problem is. And that's self-attunement. And that's something that, I've always talked to you and your sister about, to be self-attuned, to be able to know all of your, physical as well as mental symptoms, so that you know how to self-regulate yourself. When you come to us when you were younger about, like if you had a stomach ache, what are the questions that I would ask you?
Where does it hurt? why do you think it hurts?
Mm-hmm. And I asked for specific symptoms so that we could pinpoint.
We can identify what the problem is.
Yeah. And it was very important for me to have my children be able to be a good diagnostician, whether it's physical as well as mental. I have a question for you. How did all that upbringing from a mom who was a therapist, how did that help you when you went off to college and you were launched this past year?
College was hard.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to go away as a first year. Mm-hmm. Grew up my whole life in California.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very lucky because I have a very good relationship with my family.
Mm-hmm.
We're so close.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was leaving my support system.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to a place where, straight across the country from California and Massachusetts,
Mm-hmm.
Never experienced the winter before.
Mm.
And so how did I know I was going to react?
Mm-hmm.
How could I ever expect or anticipate the things I went through in the winter?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even with you,
Mm-hmm.
you thought I was fine up until I came home for winter break,
Mm-hmm.
because I genuinely did not know I was having a hard time
Mm-hmm.
until I was home.
Hmm.
I genuinely did not know I was having a difficult time being far from home, going through winter, until I was home in California and started to feel normal again. And I couldn't even recognize that I was feeling abnormal. And this is, again, someone who was raised to be so self-attuned. So I felt my whole life like I had a great footing on how I was doing, where I'm at emotionally, physically, and therefore able to respond to those needs and take care of myself. And then I went away, and I was very affected by the weather. The winter, I came home, found out I was extremely vitamin D deficient, and realized like I had experienced seasonal depression. And I know people talk about it coming from the West Coast. They go, oh, did you go through seasonal depression? Yeah, I didn't know, even going through it, even though it is talked about, what it was, because it is different for everyone. I had a certain idea of what depression was in my head. I thought depression was just being really unspeakably sad, or not being able to get out of bed. But I didn't really understand what that phrase meant, being able to get out of bed. But I now, having experienced it, understand that it's feeling so low that there's an inability to will yourself to function.
There's a paralysis.
It's a paralysis. There's this kind of emotional paralysis where even in your mind, you want to feel, you want to will. It's not like those things turn off completely, or at least for me, that's how it was. It wasn't that I wanted to stop fulfilling my responsibilities. It wasn't that I wanted to stop being active, or I wanted to stop being happy. I looked at those things and felt such a disconnect between, I want to go to class on time, I want to get out of bed and exercise, I want to walk around, I want to enjoy what's going on, I want to make sure I eat a meal. Yeah, I could not make myself do it. And I've never before had that kind of disconnect. And so going back the second semester, I think being a little bit more connected and more aware of what had happened looking in hindsight, I was able to use a lot more of the things I was given growing up
The
from
coping
you.
mechanisms.
The different mechanisms. There's a reason why my sleep pattern is getting disturbed.
Right.
There's a reason why I forgot to eat a meal. It's not, oh, I just forgot to eat a meal today. It's my mind isn't all there. I'm not being completely present. And so what is on my mind? What is distracting me? And what is making me feel this way? So I learned to look for signs when my life pattern was disturbed, then there was significance to it. And I was able to identify those things, able to understand more and be more in touch with my body and focus on that. But I think coming from a really great high school experience and having enjoyed high school and done really well, to have walked away from high school and been proud of how I did, and have the support of a family who never really pressured me to do that, which I know is not the typical story for a lot of Asian Americans, where there is a lot of pressure to perform well. I was very lucky that you and Dad were very supportive of me pursuing my own interests, and just pursuing my own happiness. But coming out of that and going into a new school where I felt all of a sudden like I was failing at everything, that was really difficult. And I did feel a lot of shame in that. That.
And what did you want to do with that shame?
I didn't want to talk about it. And I think that has a lot to say about society. And
even though you grew up really being encouraged to talk about anything and everything and all the challenges, but yet you went away, and when you started recognizing those things and those elements, you felt shame. And then what did you want to do? You wanted to conceal it.
And I took that shame and I took it so personally. I took it to be, something's wrong with me. There must be something wrong with me that I am like this. But I have to remind, it's not like there's a sudden epiphany that, oh, this shame isn't necessarily my burden to bear. This shame is something that has been perpetuated by a lot of different societal norms and stigmas. It wasn't a sudden epiphany where I realized that and then could live that out and be free of that. It's every day I still have to remind myself when I feel that shame over something that it's not a necessary shame, that yes, there are difficult things I'm going through, but that doesn't mean something's wrong with me. There's nothing fundamentally wrong with me compared to the rest of everybody else, that makes me a failure, that makes me weaker. And coming to accept that and realize that it's something I have to remind myself of continually. It's not a magical solution where you have that realization and it just is the solution. It is something that you have to continually do. And I think that I'm not the only one, even though it can feel that way. I think a lot of times your shame makes you feel very isolated. Very isolated. It makes you feel like something is specifically wrong with you, when that's not the truth. There's nothing wrong with you per se. Perhaps there are things that make you feel like something is off and you need to go seek help. You need to figure out what works for you. But that doesn't mean something is fundamentally broken with you.
Right. And when you were going through those, the trials that you were, the first thing that we found to be something we wanted to emphasize was your mental health. And that it did not matter about your performance or anything, but we wanted you to be well. And I hope that came across, that was ultimately, we did not define you by the performances, or lack thereof in college, but we wanted you to be loved and that you were not alone.
You guys, I definitely didn't feel like you guys emphasized performance, but I still felt the pressure of performance from myself, and from, I think, what I thought like other people expected of me. Even though mental health should be my priority, I felt like if I'm not performing well, if I'm not being the best in every class, if I'm not the top of my class, if I'm not in the head of every extracurricular, that, like I was in high school, like a good student in high school, that something was wrong, like that I suddenly wasn't able to perform the way I had been my whole life academically. And so I attributed that to the fact that my mental health wasn't great in college. And then it made me feel like, well, mental health is making me this way, which I think is the train of thought that is kind of perpetuated, is that if you are struggling, yes, of course, like if your mental health isn't great, it isn't stable, you're going to have that show up in other areas of your life. But then I blamed it solely on that instead of then trying to help and focus on like nurturing my mental health. I blamed it and was upset at it and shunned it the way that I think a lot of people do. And that doesn't solve anything.
Right. Instead of focusing on the reasons of why that mental health became an issue, I think what you did was you shun it and you were upset at it. There were things that, perpetuated that your drive, the focal point of performance at all cost. All those elements fed that monster, which was in your case, the anxiety, the depression that surfaced as a result of that. And I think that's a society at best. And you asked me earlier about the millennials. And oftentimes I feel that millennials have so much of this capacity in terms of their growth, but they sometimes hyper-focus on certain areas. And with any kind of hyper-focus, they forget to balance. And it's an important topic of balance. What does balance look like?
Now, for the first time, learning how to find that balance within myself, not just relying on other people and my external support system to balance me. It's about having to search in myself to find my own internal balance. And it's not an easy process. These are growing pains. It's painful because there is growth coming out of it, but it hurts. It's not fun all the time. And it's hard to remember that it is worth something. It is significant. And I also think that one of the reasons I couldn't identify something was wrong, something was going on with me until I came home, was that all of a sudden the things I had dealt with throughout my life looked different because I was in a different place. I went off to college. I'm over on the East Coast, having grown up on the West Coast my whole life, and all of a sudden anxiety isn't the same as it was in high school. Anxiety as a high schooler was panic attacks. It was staying up because I couldn't stop my brain from racing at night. It was stressing out over tests, over homework, and feeling anxious like I couldn't do well enough. And it was a lot more panicky. And then all of a sudden anxiety in college, I wasn't mentally aware of its presence all day. It was always sitting at the back of my brain, but I didn't constantly hear the voice of my anxiety like I did in high school, so I thought it was gone.
There was more of a disassociation with it.
Yes, it was a lot more of a numbing in college. Like I felt like I couldn't deal with it the same way I didn't want to deal with it the way I did in high school, which was to feel it as stress, as constant stress to do well in school. And so instead, I went to a place kind of limbo, of just a neutral numbing, and had no idea. Yeah. But, I mean, I know people say all the time that college is the time where you kind of find your own internal balance, you kind of find yourself a lot more. How was it for you during that time of your life?
Are you asking me something?
That's
what
what
are you asking me?
you just said,
I don't know what I thought you were finishing.
I just
your
asked
thought.
you how this time for me was for you.
Oh, for me as a mom to go through that? Or as a
Not
therapist?
as a mom, how was this time in your life for you?
In college? For me?
Yes.
In college? Time of my life was how it was in college for me.
Really?
Yeah.
But I think you enjoyed your college experience because you didn't necessarily enjoy your childhood as much as I did.
The liberation of college for me was what I enjoyed.
Really?
Yeah. So let's transition. What should we talk about? Keep going?
No, we should wrap up.
Oh, we should wrap up?
You're done?
Okay.
Because this is gonna run out soon.
Okay.
Okay, so is there anything you would like to say to people? Like, that's what I told people. I'm going to ask everyone, is there anything you would like to encourage people in? Or
I would highly encourage people to see what mental health truly means and how to achieve that. We focus a lot on exercising and eating right, and that also helps, our mental acuity, but to search for a life of understanding oneself, understanding some of those things that have taken place in one's life and why we react, and to be able to understand those implicit memories, those memories that are stored in those areas of feelings in the right side of the brain, and to be able to articulate and put into words in a safe place so that life can be more freeing, life can be more liberating, and to live life with more clarity. And I would want that for everyone. Yeah.
I would say that even when you feel like there is no one you can talk to, a lot of times that's something else that's telling you that. And it's never true. There's always someone, you can talk to, even when you feel completely isolated, completely alone. And I need to practice what I preach, because I'm trying to learn this still myself, but to be gentle with yourself,
to be kind to yourself,
to have compassion for yourself, because I know a lot of times there can be a lot of self-hatred, a lot of self-criticism if you're struggling with something, and to find that compassion for yourself, I think, is part of your life's journey.
Right, definitely. It is a healing process to learn and institute a kindness to oneself, and empathy.
Yeah, and that looks different for, I think, a lot of people. And I'm still trying to figure out what it is for me. It used to be writing and journaling, and I think then in college I found pottery, which has been fun. But I mean, I think it's going to, again, just like my struggles and your struggles are going to change at different times in your life. I think finding new ways to meet those and find a different balance, it's going to keep changing, and it's a balancing act, and hopefully I'll figure it out.
Oh, I know you will. So it was nice talking with you.
Nice to meet you, Mother.